So we're going to be looking at obelisks and domes tonight. And this, like I said, this is a part of our present day within the three-part series that we're investigating Babylon. Now, as you saw from the image from the present day, this is the European Union headquarters. It was built as a architecturally to look like the Tower of Babel. There's a lot of occultic themes and occultic symbolism, in architecture all across the world, which is why we're looking at domes and obelisks tonight. And last week we looked at pyramids, ziggurats specifically. But interesting that a group of nations that wanted to come together to create a better economic advantage for them to come together. As a result, the building that's their headquarters, they built it to look like the Tower of Babel. So this is not a mistake, guys. But right off the bat, let's start with Washington, D.C. This is a very unique city, very meticulously planned. I'm not going to go into all the Moloch designs of the gardens and the streets and all the different things like that. But instead, tonight we're just looking at these two concepts that are going to be in the picture here. We got both the obelisk, and then you have the dome of the Capitol across the mall from it down the way. Now, there's other domes throughout the city as well, but this is the most recognizable. We're going to talk about the obelisks first, and then we'll skip into the domes and specifically what's unique about all these domes in their design and what they represent. So this is in D.C., one of the most famous, called the Washington Monument. This, very similar, it's just not as far apart, and they're not as big, but you have St. Peter's Square in the Vatican, sometimes known as St. Peter's Basilica, but the entire square itself is what facilitates and houses this obelisk in front of this big Capitol-looking building, which is ancient Greek and Roman architecture with the dome on the back side of it. So this is par for the course. In fact, this particular obelisk is from ancient Egypt, and it's 4,000 years old. So this wasn't a new replica. This was transported from Egypt specifically to be put inside the independent sovereign city called Vatican City. Very unique, guys. This is one in Paris, France. That is put up, and it's also transported. This one specifically from Luxor, Egypt, and it's just down the road from the Eiffel Tower. This is in Buenos Aires, Argentina, also in Isidro Square. Now, keep in mind, guys, a lot of the people aren't aware of this, but obelisks, as a general concept, they're not all pointed, right? So but they all tall and cylindrical, and but there's a lot of them around the world that it did not include because they don't have the actual pointed pyramid on top, but they are all tall and tapered, cylindrical, extending towards the top of it. So it just depends on like which country of architecture. But even within the various countries, because you find them everywhere, but even within the various artistic expressions from different countries, you have some that are tapered off with a point on top and some that are not. So I included a lot of the ones that do have a tapered point with a pyramid on top for this particular presentation. And again, I've got like 80 slides. I don't, I may have to brush through some of them real quickly because it would take 3 hours to do. I could have spent 4 hours presenting all the compiled images from all around the world and all the different cities that share this particular architecture of obelisks and domes. It is, besides the ziggurats, it is one of the most prevalent occultic architectures that are shared by countries, cities all across the plane of the earth. It's truly amazing that they're literally right in our face this whole time. So this is in Rome, Italy. They put a cross on top of this one. How hilarious. But in fact, this one particularly also transported from Egypt. And if you zoom in on it, I can't really show you too well, but there is actual hieroglyphs still on this one. It's very ornate, very detailed. This is also in London, England. This one's got hieroglyphs all over it as well. It's even got the two sphinxes on bottom left and right of it. Those sphinxes are newer additions, but the actual pyramid itself, I can't remember what they called this one. I think they call it Cleopatra's Needle. And it also is filled with hieroglyphs from ancient Egypt. This one, even as you can see, has damage on some of it. This is truly Luxor, ancient Egypt, still standing today. Temple of Ptah, also called the Temple of Osiris, but it's also has the obelisk right out front, hieroglyphs all over it. Just to give you a flashback of, in case you're new to the channel, in case you're not aware, in case you haven't seen the previous 8 episodes we've done in this series, just letting you know, this is definitely an ancient Egyptian concept, the obelisks. And so are the domes, actually. A lot of people are not aware of that. So here we are in Aksum, Egypt. This is in what we would call the Upper Kingdom, which was literally the southern. It's kind of backwards in ancient Egypt, but the Upper Kingdom is referred to as the upper, as what we would call the southern area of ancient Egypt along the Nile. And this is one of their cities of Aksum. And this is literally a circle of pyramids mixed with an obelisk in the center, a bigger obelisk in the center of these other smaller pyramids. And the obelisk in the center does not have the pointed pyramid at the top, but it is an obelisk 100%. So this is an ancient site as well. They don't exactly know how old this site is. Sydney, Australia. How interesting, guys. Here's a memorial that was put up, pyramid on top, pyramid capped obelisk. And a lot of these, what's interesting, if you look at some of these that are in newer cities that are, built in the last 200-300 years, the obelisks that are put up are a memorial for a battle or for a war, which I think is fascinating, because the obelisk itself represents the phallic of Osiris, according to ancient legend from ancient Egypt. And so then the dome supposedly represents the womb of Isis, his sister/wife, whom he had Horus with. And the idea was it represented their power, but it also, I personally think from other research, that there's a double meaning, not just what the ancient Egyptians claim about the obelisks and the domes, but there was a double meaning that the obelisk itself was a representation of the Tower of Babel, which is why it's pointed up towards, the dome, the firmament, as the scriptures describe to us. And the dome itself is a representation of the firmament, which we're going to go into that. And, after we finish talking about the obelisks, we'll go into that deeper as well. Here is modern day architecture in Dubai. So if you look here on the left, there is a building that we actually reviewed last week that are ziggurat shapes inside of an actual pointed pyramid. But this is a building in the foreground who was designed to look like an obelisk, but then they put some side decorations on it. In fact, here is the building when it was being built, before it was completed, with all of its side fixtures and everything that kind of gives it a different look from what you see when it's all lit up at night. They literally built an obelisk as a building, as a skyscraper. So it's pretty wild. Seattle, Washington. Here's a large building built as an obelisk as well. They're all over the place, guys. Chicago, Illinois. This one is kind of a beefy obelisk with an actual spear at the top. And it's in downtown Chicago. You can actually see it here lit up on the left. And there's even another one in the center with what looks like a diamond shape on the top of that particular building, that older building from the 70s. But they're all over the place, by the way. I'm just pointing out the most noticeable ones and their architectural designs, but they truly are everywhere in many, many different cities. Here's Philadelphia. And as you can see, this is an obelisk-shaped building. But then you have other obelisk-shaped buildings as well. Some of them a little bit beefier designs, a little bit different, a little more geometrical designs. Everywhere, guys. So many cities. The Royal Clock Tower. This one's kind of interesting. This is actually in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, guys. This is a massive, massive structure that they have in Saudi Arabia and Mecca. This is a huge structure. Of course, you have the half moon, crescent moon, if you will, which is the Star of Ishtar, or the Star of Isis, also Ashtora. It's the same concept. It's the moon god. That's literally was Isis. That's so fitting that Isis's symbol is on top of a huge structure that is supposed to be a more modern, advanced version of an obelisk, which is actually an office building as well. And there's so much symbolism everywhere. I'm just covering the surface. So this is a close-up of it. It's a huge, mega structure, big building, one of the biggest buildings in Saudi Arabia. This is actually something interesting, guys, because a lot of people don't realize just how far-reaching this type of architecture is. And it's not just because the people like the architecture; they represent things. They mean something to the people that are building these. This is also before World War II. So even though I mentioned we're going to look at some ones in China and other cities, other nations where they built them as memorials for battles or for specific moments, which is interesting again, but like I said, because Osiris, which is what the phallic obelisk represents, was also considered Apollo or Apollyon to the Greeks, as we reviewed in previous episodes, who was a god of war. So how interesting that you would have a war or battle memorial and you'd put up a pyramid or an obelisk. It's just fitting, in my opinion. But this is actually in the Philippines, in Davao City, there used to be a Japanese district in the Philippines that was mainly populated by just Japanese people, and they had built this pyramid and obelisk before World War II. It was destroyed after the battles of World War II. This is in Istanbul, Turkey. This is an ancient one that still has hieroglyphs on the side. As you guys used to know, Turkey would be what we call Asia Minor in the scriptures. Also used to be inhabited by the land of the Hittites and the Greeks. So yeah, this is lots of architecture all over the place, from the 2 to 2,500 years ago from the ancient world in Turkey. But all the way North Europe to the Netherlands, guys. To the Netherlands, we have a ziggurat pyramid with an obelisk with a pointed pyramid on top. In Utrecht, I can't even say it right. The Utrecht, Netherlands. Pretty wild. Oh, there's a double. Sorry. I'm hitting the wrong button. Sorry. Okay. So here we go to Stockholm, Sweden. And they've got a huge obelisk in their city in Stockholm. We go to Caracas, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to South America, to Venezuela. And they decided to put a massive obelisk here in Caracas. This is in New York City, New York. This is I couldn't get information. I mean, I could, I just didn't have time to get the information fully on this one. It's got hieroglyphs all over it. More than likely it's been transplanted because New York is a very prominent city. Yeah, and this is D Love is saying this is also called Cleopatra's Needle. I had read that Cleopatra's Needle was the name given to the one in London as well. So maybe I read the wrong information. Maybe they're both called that because they're both designed after that. But this one specifically looks to be authentic. But hey, it could be a replica anyway. But this one is interesting. It hurts in Germany because it actually. It's considered a sundial in addition to just being a monument of an obelisk. I think that's kind of interesting. It's got this little ball on top that gets in the way of the sun. How interesting is that? We're going to be talking about some of that stuff in future episodes and a little bit on this episode. But this is all the way. So we just jumped from New York, from the Netherlands to South America to Venezuela to New York to Sweden to Germany. Now we're in India. Look at this Greek architecture, ancient Greek and Roman architecture in Hyderabad, India, with an obelisk with a ball on top. How interesting, guys. Let's run over to Pakistan. All right, we're jumping all across the world, okay? Islamabad, Pakistan. This is a massive temple. It's got pyramids all over, the shape of the sides of the temple, and it's got the obelisks surrounding it. It's got of course, the star of Ishtar, Ashtoreth, Isis, as the moon, I should say, the crescent moon in the center of it, but all around it are these massive obelisks. And on the top of the obelisks are these little balls. We're going to talk about that. Here it is in the Kremlin, Russia. In Russia, we have an obelisk-shaped unique monument. This is its unique view from the park that it's in, also with the ball on top. We'll talk about that. This is an this is like 100 years ago in Russia, in Moscow. It was a war memorial that was put up. And this is it being kind of memorialized, if you will, with ceremony by the Russian Orthodox Church, as well as the military commanders. And this was to the revolution of ancient Russia, of Russia 100 years ago, the Bolshevik Revolution. This was done in memorial to that. Again, because of a battle and overthrow revolution, they put up a statue that is commemorating Nimrod, who was, as we've already talked about in previous episodes, literally leading the world against against God, under the premise of Satan, and leading the world against God in the first revolution. Also, this one has a ball on top, even 100 years ago. Helsinki, Finland, ball on top, obelisk in the center of the town square. Madhya Pradesh in India. Here we go into an actual dome. Also a unique design. Okay, so it's fascinating, right? You got the dome look with, it's not quite an obelisk on top. It's got these unique little descending sized cylinder plates on top of it. It's very unique. But this is one of the more famous domes that we see, is the Dome of the Rock. We all know this is in Jerusalem. Also has the little ball on top. You'll never not see it after this episode, guys. They are everywhere. Isfahan, Iran. Huge, massive dome. Multiple balls on top. Here it is in Florence, Italy. Another famous dome. Little ball on top. There's a reason for that. Istanbul, Turkey. We're back to Turkey again. This is a massive temple, fortress, old temple with multiple domes and a ball on top. Oh, but we're not done. All the obelisks around it have balls on top as well. Here it is during the daytime. Completely everywhere. The whole thing. Consistency of design all across the world, guys. Yes, they're made of slightly different materials, different colors, small artistic changes, consistency of design, because it all symbolizes the same stuff. This is why they continue to make these shapes over and over and over. Oh, by the way, there's a true obelisk in the bottom right-hand corner. We'll go back to Moscow, Russia. These are some of the more pretty little domes. And, oh, they all got balls on top. You go to St. Peter's Basilica, like we looked at one of our first images here. We go back to Vatican City. We see one of the massive domes behind the big obelisk. Yes, there's also a ball on top. It's pretty wild, isn't it? St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Yep, also balls on top. You got multiple places of little obelisk shapes, and as according to how the building is designed, but then you have the balls on top everywhere. How about the Taj Mahal, right? Supposedly 3,000-4,000 years old, so they guess. Some people think it was built as early as the 1500s. Other people think it's 4,000 years old. A lot of people argue about its historicity. Domes everywhere, obelisks all around it, balls on top of everything. Everything. DJ Christina Marie, that's going to be coming up in a few episodes. We're going to be talking about NASA. It's part of our modern day series, present day. We'll be talking about the shape of ships and things. So we'll keep going through here, and we see this is actually a dome in ancient Cairo, in ancient Egypt. It's dated back approximately 3,000 years old. Now, this isn't impressive by any means, right? Looks like a hole in the ground. Looks like a little cave or something, but they just haven't uncovered it. They haven't excavated it entirely. And this actually just shows you some of the architecture that has been excavated from this particular site, where they already were, supposedly 3,000 years ago, they were already creating the dome shapes or using the dome concept. And we also see this in ancient architecture besides Egypt. For example, the Pantheon in Rome, which they date to approximately 2,000 years ago. Some people believe it was built way before that, 2,300 years ago, but regardless, it is a impressive structure, and it has all of it together. You have your pointed pyramid, you have your dome in the back, you have your obelisk out front with the ball on top, all of it together. And inside is, you clearly see from the inside that it is a dome, and it's amazing architecture considering that this was, 2,000 years ago. minimum. Very interesting, guys. And to me, like, there's no accident that they actually would leave a huge hole in this building as a part of this design, because they understood, everyone back then understood the biblical cosmological model. They understood, whether they accredited the creation to Yahweh or to the pantheon of other gods they worship, they all believed and understood that they lived in an enclosed room that was enclosed by a firmament. And they knew that there were doorways, portals, gateways, whatever you want to call them, in that firmament that allowed you to go out above the firmament, above the enclosed room, to where the quote gods lived, the Elohim, the heavenly beings, this what they would call the celestial beings, which is the angels and the creator. They all knew about that. And this is not the pantheon of gods that we've talked about in previous episodes who supposedly lived in the sky. This was beyond that. This was the celestial beings. So this is even greater than the pantheon of gods they talked about. Even though they sometimes would attribute some of the pantheon, depending on the culture, sometimes would attribute the pantheon of gods who lived in the sky as being the creators. You have to dig deep into some of their ancient stories. The closer you get back towards the actual Tower of Babel, the closer you get back towards the flood, which would be Noah propagating the story of who God and the angels are who live above the firmament. So that's why the designs are so similar, and they all knew where we lived. So this is interesting. This is the Temple of Heaven in Beijing. It's only 600 years old, but at the same time, even all the way in China, in Beijing, China, they're doing the same type of architecture inside a massive dome inside this building, which I think is fascinating, and it's extremely beautiful, very artistic. Dragons everywhere, but you got a Pegasus, flying things, dragons, snakes. They were, yeah, lots of chimeras, lots of the same imagery that we'd see from the Greeks and the Egyptians, the Akkadians, the Chaldeans, the Hittites. All right, come back to Washington, D.C. This is the capital. You've got a pretty famous dome, multi-tiered dome, and then on the top, you've got a guy standing on a ball. This is consistent. This is consistent all over the United States, guys. This is extremely consistent all over the United States. They're all standing on top of a ball. All the state capitol buildings, except for a couple of them, have this exact same design with just a little bit different here and there. They're all domes. They all have a ball on top, and they all have a guy on top of that. There is a reason for that. I want you guys to remember that. It's going to come into play more as we explore this series and we go further into investigating Babylon, specifically leading up to the return of the Messiah. It's very interesting in what they believe, what they have believed, what the Bible shows us. I'm going to tie it all together, guys. That's what we're doing in this series. We're linking it all together piece by piece so that when we're done, you have a foundation to understand why we see all this stuff across the world that we see. And why the scriptures talk about things that it does. I'm going to put it all together for you. This is the Supreme Court in Jerusalem in Israel. Many people have seen these images before, but they have gone out of their way to apply this type of symbolism in their architecture to their Supreme Courts. So you've got on the left-hand side, you've got an obelisk. You've got a dome on the interior. On the bottom right, you've got an actual pyramid with the all-seeing eye place open on the top, which is actually sitting inside of a circular dome. And that's actually on the top right. You can see the pyramid that you see below it. You see the pyramid on the top right, on the top of the building, basically, which is crazy. So yeah, it's just that's the same symbols are everywhere. This is in Eilat. It's one of the cities in Israel. I think there's like 40,000 people in the city. They're actually known for their Eilat stones, which is really precious stones beautiful stones that you can get from Israel. A lot of people that make jewelry like to use Eilat stones. This is your traditional Freemason or Masonic symbols that they're using, all the same concepts. Now, a lot of people would say, well, you've got this is in scripture. Yes, we're going to go over the scriptures of the two pillars on the outside of the pyramid and the LCNI, but there's a reason I'm introducing this, because I want you guys to understand how they too, the Freemasons, have taken these symbols. They agree with them 100%. They use them in a lot of their stuff, but they attribute their religion, which is not the scriptures, but they attribute someone from the scriptures to their religion, and then they tie all these symbols to that. So I'm going to go over that stuff in just a few minutes, but just kind of give you an introduction here that even in the land of Israel, we have the all-seeing eye. You've got the builder's compass and square. You got the big G, which a lot of people would say stands for like God, but it's specifically the version of God that they would worship. But you have the pyramid, and this is in Israel. I mean, this is the heart of Egypt. The religion, the philosophy of Egypt, of ancient Egypt, just chilling in a secret society club in Israel. And yes, you've got the two balls. One's an earth, one's another black ball. I can't remember. If you guys know in the comment what the secondary ball is supposed to be, because these were not originally on the two pillars that Solomon had built, but I can't remember what the Freemasons' view is for that black ball. But of course, all the symbolism is there. This is what they call Solomon's Pillar Lodge. This is the inscription that's on the bottom part that's fuzzy in this picture, so I just gave you a close-up. But here is where the Freemasons get their allegiance to some of these ideas from the scriptures, and then they try to, pass it off as being justified because they connected to Solomon. But it's a deception. None of that. None of the things that these images stand for, with this architecture, with these symbols of the past, these obelisks, these domes. None of that stuff is attributed specifically to anything good in the scriptures, but instead it's attributed to idolatry, mostly from the ancient practices. But here is the Masonic legend of Hiram Abiff, and not to be confused with the actual Hiram that was the king of Tyre, but this was specifically an artisan that's mentioned. I believe it's in First Kings. We'll go over the scripture here in a minute. He was just actually from the tribe of Naphtali, or at least his mother was, but they lived in Tyre. So the tale of Hiram Abiff, as presented in Masonic lodges, it underpins the third degree, and that's just one of the steps they take in their little secret society. It starts with his arrival in Jerusalem and is appointed by Solomon as a chief architect and master of works at the construction of his temple. Now, here's actually what Josephus has to say. Josephus is a 2nd century AD historian. He was a Pharisee. He was supposedly a priest to some regard. Even though the temple had already been destroyed, but he was also a historian. I don't believe everything he says. I struggle with some of the things he says, but his perspective at least gives you an idea, whether it's right or wrong. At least we get to read his perspective in the 2nd century AD about these concepts. So that's information to consider. You may come to your own conclusions. I at least want to present it to you. In the Antiquity of the Jews, Book 8, Chapter 3, in paragraph 4, Josephus says this. He says, "Now Solomon sent for an artificer out of Tyre, whose name was Hiram. He was by birth of the tribe of Naphtali on his mother's side, for she was of that tribe. But his father was of the stock of the Israelites. This man was skillful in all sorts of work, but his chief skill lay in working in gold and silver and brass, by whom were made all the mechanical works about the temple, according to the will of Solomon." And here's an actual, what's is interesting, guys, because I've never heard Hiram Abiff be associated with Foucault's pendulum. But here is an actual Hiram Abiff statue on top of Foucault's pendulum. How interesting is that? Westblaze, yeah, Boaz and Joachim, those are supposedly the name of the two pillars. But specifically, I was wondering if anyone knew what the black ball meant on top of one of the pillars, according to the Masonic legend. I just didn't look it up before the presentation. But yeah, I think this is interesting because if you guys have done any research on all the debates between people that are, want to talk about biblical cosmology versus the heliocentric occultic model that's been presented to us since children, many people will trying to lean on the occultic model of the globe and space. They'll lean on Foucault's pendulum, this little swinging little point. They'll lean on that to say that, oh, it's, the Earth's Coriolis effect is what causes that thing to move, even though they literally, which is crazy, guys, they literally pull the thing back and let it go and let it start swinging. But then they see, it's not swinging just perfectly back and forth. It starts moving around and swinging in a like a elliptic fashion because of the Coriolis effect, because the Earth is spinning. There's all these forces happening, and so they, even though they started the initial force, which is the third law of motion. So it's crazy to me. All right, so David Shear is saying, Jasmine W. and David Shear both are saying that the black ball means rejection in Freemasonry. So glad you guys brought that up. It's very interesting. Very interesting. So the black ball means rejection. That's just even more so to the point that I'm going to make later. But so they have supposedly the globe on one side, rejection on the other side by the black ball. Well, we're going to talk about both of those in future episodes. So I think that's going to be interesting, considering if that's its intended meaning. But there's a reason, guys, because the ancient occult, which was what we've been studying while we investigate Babylon, they're the ones who literally created the Ball Earth model, by which they try to use Foucault's pendulum to prove the Ball Earth model and the pseudoscience that surrounds it. So how interesting that they would have Hiram Abiff also connected with the pendulum. It's very interesting. Now let's go into 1 Kings 7, 13 through 14. It says, now King Solomon sent word and had Hiram brought from Tyre. He was a widow's son from the tribe of Naphtali. His father was a man of Tyre, an artisan in bronze, and he was filled with wisdom, skill, and knowledge for doing any work in bronze. So he came to King Solomon and performed all his work. So, guys, just to give you a quick geography, so you're not lost here. The idea that this particular artisan came down from the city of Tyre, which would have been off the coast up here near Sidon, the territory of Asher, but also this is the land of portions during the days of the book of Joshua. So the region of Naphtali was literally just right next door. So this would be very common for him to just be in the city over on the coast. Not a big deal. But he's the guy that was selected to come down and help build the Temple of Solomon, which is fascinating, guys. And this is this Hiram Abiff guy who came from this particular land of Tyre, the city of Tyre, this Naphtali descendant. He's the one that they just idolize like crazy in the Masonic cult. Okay, West Blaze has found another source claiming that the two balls on the two pillars, one's supposed to be a celestial globe, and the other one's supposed to be a terrestrial globe. That's interesting. That's interesting. Still, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to just more proving my points. Okay. Oh yes, James Carter. That's right. Good call, brother. Good call. Masons do. Well, lots of artisans and masons, they might use a plumb bob to justify a wall, which is the same as Foucault's pendulum. Yeah. Interesting. Yep. They just use the plumb bob to create the pendulum concept, which is all just smoke and mirrors, because they literally push it by pulling it and letting it go according to gravity. According to the downward pull, often called gravity. But ultimately, that's interesting. So if we keep going here, this is actually within the Supreme Court of Israel. This is actually a meeting of some of their legislators. You can see the current, at the bottom here, you can see the current Prime Minister of Israel. Can't remember his name right now. Don't care to know it. But ultimately, look behind him, guys. Look behind him. This sun that's shooting down these blue and white rays from the top of the wall behind them. And then in the middle of that, you've got this, crest-looking design with a menorah in the center. I'm just going to go ahead and say, guys, this menorah has no business being inside of this design. This is exactly what I was referring to with the Freemasons, where they take concepts from the scriptures, but they infuse it into occult ideas so that they can claim that it has validation from God. Modern day Pharisaical Judaism does the same thing. Absolutely does the same thing. This is literally just an ancient depiction of the blessing of Ra coming down upon the king of ancient Egypt, whom, by the way, is holding the pie in his hand, pi sign, because yes, they dealt with lots of mathematics. I mean, that's how they were amazing builders. They were educated, right? And of course, you have the serpent at the top of this sun is supposed to be wrapping the sun, and it's shining its rays down upon this king on this Egyptian hieroglyph. Yeah, there's no business for that menorah to be in this kind of image, but that's the kind of stuff that we're seeing. That's the kind of stuff that they infuse together to try to claim legitimacy of some of these ideas. So it's just sad. Here is George Washington's Masonic Temple, which is massive. It's actually gone through different designs over the years. This is its latest updated design. You've got the ziggurat at the top. You've got a overall shape of an actual obelisk in a large scale fashion, but it's more in a Greek architecture. But there's literally an obelisk with not just a normal pyramid on top, but a ziggurat on top. We talked about what those mean last week on part 8. And of course, you got the huge garden in front. That is the Masonic compass and square with the G in the center. This is an actual coin from a long time ago because this is a Masonic coin. They idolized George Washington as a master mason. You have the all-seeing eye with the sun rays coming down over the square and some of their builders' tools. Yeah. It's all connected, guys. It's all the same. This is why, the whole concept of a secret cult or secret society would be frowned upon by Ephesians 5, right? That we would expose the deeds of darkness, that we would not participate in those. This is our call as believers to walk in the light, not in the darkness, as those do who are destined for destruction, sealing their own fate. So this is just a short overview as we went all across the world, different countries, cities, and different, whole people groups. To see they all share the same desire to build these pyramids, these obelisks, these domes, and they have infused with it modern day secret societies. By the way, I don't have the time to do, another hour on all the connections and all the Freemasonic temples. And they literally call their meeting halls, they call them temples all over the world. There's even one in Antarctica, supposedly. They go and build them all over the world, all the different countries. It transcends borders and languages, guys, because it's a recruiting phase for other secret societies of the people that are the movers and shakers behind most nations. So, and all the symbolism wrapped into their secret society is the same symbolism we see from ancient Egypt, from ancient Greece, from ancient Samaria. This is the same religion, just like we keep talking about everywhere. It's the same worship to the same types of gods and the same religion all over the place. And unfortunately, it's even in, infiltrated all the way into modern day Israel, which, established by Rockefellers, into the Supreme Court even, which is very symbolic since that is literally the place of judgment. Yeah. Very sad.